The clock on the dashboard blinked 1:47 a.m. as the old sedan sped down the deserted highway, headlights piercing through the fog that clung to the dark winding roads of Western Virginia. James was behind the wheel, fighting the weight of his eyelids, his fingers drumming restlessly against the steering wheel. In the passenger seat, Kyle snored softly, his head lolling against the window. In the back, Mark was awake, his eyes scanning the darkness outside, his stomach growling. "Hey man, I'm starving," Mark grumbled, leaning forward between the front seats. "We should have grabbed something before we left the show." James shook his head. Everything was closed. Besides, you were too busy trying to chat up that bartender. "Yeah, and she shut you down hard," Kyle mumbled, waking up just in time to laugh. Mark rolled his eyes. "Whatever, man. I need food." As if on cue, the faint glow of a neon sign emerged through the fog. The letters flickered in a sickly yellow. Mel's 24-hour diner. It sat alone on the side of the road, paint peeling from the walls, windows murky and dim. The parking lot was empty, except for a rusted pickup that looked like it hadn't moved in years. James hesitated, glancing at the clock again. This place looked sketchy. Kyle shrugged. "I'm hungry too, and I don't see anything else for miles." Mark was already unbuckling his seatbelt. "Let's just grab some burgers and get out of here." Reluctantly, James pulled into the lot, gravel crunching under the tires as he parked beside the old truck. The air was heavy and still as they stepped out, the fog swirling around their ankles. The diner loomed before them, its windows reflecting nothing but darkness. "Why do I feel like we're walking into a horror movie?" James muttered as they approached the door. Kyle scoffed. "Relax, it's just some dive. Probably a bunch of truckers and night owls inside." He pushed open the door, and a bell above it jingled. The smell of stale grease and burnt coffee hit them as they stepped into the diner. The interior was dimly lit, the buzzing fluorescent lights casting an eerie yellowish glow. Red vinyl booths lined the walls, their cushions cracked and worn. A long counter stretched along the far side, stools with torn seats bolted to the floor. Behind the counter stood a waitress, her back to them, shoulders hunched as she stared down at something they couldn't see. Her hair was a tangled mess, falling limp over her shoulders. She didn't turn around at the sound of the bell. Hi," James called out hesitantly. No response. Mark frowned. Maybe she didn't hear us. He walked up to the counter and tapped on it. "Hey, we're looking to get some food." The waitress turned slowly, her movements jerky, unnatural. Her face was pale, eyes sunken deep into her skull, lips pulled into a thin, tight line. She looked at them without blinking, her expression vacant. "Sit anywhere you like," she said in a flat, emotionless voice. The three exchanged uneasy glances but slid into the nearest booth. The vinyl was cold and sticky, and James could feel the springs poking through the seat. Mark picked up the menu, his face twisting in disgust. It was stained and greasy, the pages curling at the edges. "God, this place is nasty." Kyle leaned back, yawning. "Well, we'll just grab some burgers and head out. No big deal." The waitress shuffled over, her movements stiff and awkward. She didn't take out a notepad, just stared down at them with that same blank expression. "Ready to order?" James cleared his throat. 3 cheeseburgers and fries. Coffee too." The waitress didn't respond, just turned around and walked back to the kitchen, disappearing through a door that swung shut behind her. It didn't bounce or creak, just snapped shut with a finality that made the hairs on the back of James' neck stand up. "Something's off about her," he whispered, leaning across the table. "Did you see her face? She looked dead." "Yeah, no kidding," Mark said, glancing nervously at the door. "This place gives me the creeps. Let's just eat fast and go." They sat in silence, the hum of the fluorescent lights the only sound. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows, turning the world into a swirling gray void. The door to the kitchen burst open, and the waitress came out holding a tray. She moved robotically, setting the plates down in front of them. The burgers were gray and greasy, the buns soggy. The fries were limp and cold, the coffee thick and black, swirling in the cups like oil. Mark stared at his plate, his appetite gone. "This looks disgusting." Kyle poked his burger with a fork. "I don't even think this is real meat." James looked around the diner, his skin crawling. The place was empty except for a man sitting in a booth in the far corner, hunched over his food, shoulders trembling. He was facing the wall, his back to them, his body rigid and still. "I didn't even see him when we walked in," James whispered. "How long has he been there?" Kyle looked over, his face pale. "I don't like this, man. Let's get out of here." As they started to get up, the man in the corner moved. His head twisted around slowly, impossibly far, until his face was staring at them upside down. His eyes were wide and empty, his mouth hanging open in a silent scream. James stumbled back, knocking over his chair. God! The man's head snapped back into place, his body convulsing before going still again. He didn't move after that, just sat facing the wall, shoulders trembling. Mark's voice was shaking. "We're leaving now." They hurried toward the door, but the waitress was standing in front of it, blocking their path. Her head was tilted at an unnatural angle, her neck bent like a broken doll. Her eyes were hollow, lips stretched into a grotesque smile. "Leaving so soon?" she crooned, her voice distorted, echoing around them. The lights flickered, the walls seeming to close in. The windows were dark, the fog outside so thick they couldn't see the car. The man in the corner started to laugh, a hollow, rasping sound that grew louder and louder until it filled the room. James's heart was pounding, his hands shaking. "Get out of the way!" He shoved past her, the others following close behind. The bell above the door jangled as they burst outside, the cold air hitting them like a slap. They didn't look back. They didn't dare. They piled into the car, James fumbling with the keys before jamming them into the ignition. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. Gravel sprayed as they sped out of the parking lot, the neon sign flickering in the rearview mirror before disappearing into the fog. No one spoke as they drove down the empty highway, the diner fading behind them. They didn't stop until they were miles away, pulling over at a brightly lit gas station. Mark broke the silence, his voice hollow. What the hell was that place?" James shook his head, his hands still trembling. "I don't know, but we're never stopping there again." They sat in the car for a long time, the lights from the gas station washing over them, pushing back the darkness. And in the distance, hidden in the fog, the diner waited, its neon sign flickering faintly, the bell above the door softly jingling as it swung open, ready for its next guest. Thanks for joining us on the open road, where anything can happen and there's always another adventure right around the corner. Remember to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on the open road.